Castles are a great subject to draw. They've often got really interesting shapes, large block forms that angle in all sorts of directions, that are a great underlying structure. But then on top of that, there's all that interesting stonework as well. However, they can also be a challenging subject to draw, particularly because of all that underlying stonework everywhere. So how do we draw these interesting but challenging subjects and have something at the end that looks somewhat realistic, where we capture the effect, the feel, that rustic outline and surface and texture of a castle, and yet not get so bogged down drawing stones that our drawing ends up looking as tedious as the experience was in drawing it, or where we just don't get so bored that we do some very detailed and a lot not at all, or we just rush them. There must be a better way. What's a technique that we can use? Let me demonstrate in this drawing of a part of Windsor Castle. Now, one of the things to realise about stonework in a castle is that, firstly, it's not all the same, and secondly, how we view it really does depend on what angle we're viewing it from and how far away we are in viewing it. And although in a drawing or a photo, we're not changing position, the castle is moving away from us as we stand still. Because they are often so large, either looking up or looking along castle walls can really change the impact of how the stone looks, and therefore how we should draw it to best capture that effect. And as you often hear me say, again, this is all about capturing the effect of how something looks, not trying to draw the detail of it. But as I also often say, a great way to start this is on some of the closer parts of whatever surface we're looking at, in this case the stonework, drawing it in more detail, because the eye will capture this, get a sense of what it is it's looking at, and then be able to imply or see this detail further away in more distant parts where we don't draw it, or we don't draw it in nearly as much detail. Now, with this castle, I start with this closest section, both because I want to draw it with a slightly heavier, more considered feel, but also because it really is the natural starting point. Now, with this photo, as in many photos, there is a distortion where the vertical lines are dragged in together towards the center of the picture as they move up. I don't want to draw this, I don't want to capture this, because it certainly wasn't there in reality. It's not such a tall structure that it was looking as if it was in 3-point perspective. So I'm correcting this and making all my vertical lines vertical. So the main thing I'm trying to do at the start, though, is to block out some of the major shapes, get a sense of exactly how these towers clustered together relate to each other, how they interlock. And it really did remind me of building a tower with children's blocks. They really are relatively simple blocks stacked on one another, with one or two places where we really need to pay more attention where they join up. So at this point, I'm trying to get some fairly light guidelines, and I'm not worried about the stonework particularly. And the further away or the further up I go, the more I try to draw these outlines lightly, because changing the weight of our line is a very important tool in creating the sense of distance that's so useful in larger subjects such as this. So I don't want to do heavy lines where in the end I'm going to want lighter lines. But in this front corner, front center corner, I do know that I want heavy lines, so I'm not worried about that. So I just draw in this, I guess it's an attendance booth, or maybe a grenadier guard stands there. I can't remember. And perspective is important in this tower, very much so. Most obviously with this wall to the left, but also in every wall that curves away from us. And because the stonework is laid in horizontal layers, it's going to be important to capture the perspective angles and the fan-in pattern as the angles move above eye level. But now I'm trying to draw the upper part, which particularly means I need to be aware of the castellations, the indents in the top where the archers could fire their arrows. Now, that's the sort of detail where it's easy to try and draw too much detail and come to grief in trying to put too many lines accurately in too small a space. And again, so therefore, this is a spot where it's usually more effective to draw the effect of the detail rather than draw it with a line for line accuracy. Now I'm drawing this with a 0.1 millimeter pen, which is a lighter pen than I usually use, but there's probably going to be more detail on this for its size than I normally do because of all these stones. Now there are a lot of larger dressed stones on corners of this castle, so I want to suggest at least some of those, but again, without trying to get too bogged down. The important thing is to try and get the scale as correct as I can for these larger stones, not to make them too large, because that will make the castle feel smaller than it actually is. So here I am doing some of those cornerstones now. This drawing took me 32 minutes to do in real time. You're watching most of it in double time. A small part at the start, just very slightly faster than that again. So if you want to basically watch me draw it in real time, use that cog icon on the screen, and that will reduce this video to half speed, which will pretty much make it actual speed. Now here I am doing the horizontal lines for the stonework, and I'm going to do more of it here in this front lower section and the one immediately above this front corner tower. The important thing again is to not let these be too large, but to create stone effect that pretty much represents what we see. In a sense, I need to draw them slightly smaller than what I see in the drawing to allow for the thickness of my line, because my line is thicker than the line that's in the reference. So if I draw my lines so that the stones look the same size, I'm actually going to be drawing them larger and I won't fit as many in, and that again will give me a scale problem. So I spend a bit more time just in this front corner, and again though I don't want to do all of the stones, because if I do all of them, even in this closest part, then it's going to be hard to know where to stop. But you'll notice now as I do the stones in this further back and higher up tower, I'm not doing them so that it looks quite the same. I'm doing a lighter touch firstly, and particularly with the vertical lines between the stones, I'm not really doing those in the same way. I'm more just doing dots to indicate the fact that these stones are a lot smaller. So by drawing the effect differently when it's further away, it helps to give the sense of distance. And I do this in all parts of the tower. When I'm higher up and further away, I do my vertical lines more as dots, but when I'm lower down and closer, I do more detail, as in these larger corner blocks that I've just done here in this corner of the tower that stepped back a bit from the first part I drew. And need to keep those perspective angles as accurate as we can, because that will draw attention if we don't get it right. So finishing some more stones down here. Now that window that's to the, well, it's just to the right of my pen now, that doesn't have a window in it but had stones in it. I forgot to draw those stones in while I was making the video, but if you want to have a look at the thumbnail, I put those lines in to represent the stonework of that filled in, that blocked in window before I took the photo for the thumbnail. So you can see the actual finished drawing there if you want. And now I've got this wall here. You'll notice that I lessen the angle a little bit. I did that because I was taking away the camera distortion, and part of what happens when the camera lens pulls the verticals to the sides inwards is that the perspective angles are lifted just a bit higher. So that was part of getting rid of the camera distortion. And again, just little dots to represent the vertical marks, the vertical joins between the stones. Now I just have these windows that come out from the side as the last significant part of detail. I don't want to get too bogged down in the detail for this because it is sitting further back than my closest section, so I want to keep them sitting further back. Of course, you'll find this photo of part of Windsor Castle on my channel community page if you'd like to have a go drawing this yourself. It is a fun topic, I think, and it's a very good subject for practicing drawing the effect of detail, not the exactness of it, but also for drawing it in such a way to create a sense of depth, of distance in our scene. And particularly if it's the sort of subject you feel is a weakness in any of your drawings, again, this is a great subject to tackle it head on. But can I suggest that you don't draw it along with me, watching me draw, but that you watch my video, hear the comments I make, and then look at the reference and draw it yourself. And then afterwards, compare it with mine. That's a far more helpful learning process for you to do than to draw along with me, where in the end it's going to be tempting probably not to spend more time looking at my marks rather than looking at the reference. And the important thing is for you to learn to, from the reference, work out in your mind creatively how to translate that into the sorts of marks and lines that you need to create the effect of the castle. So I'm just finishing doing some of the line work down here. This little fence stonework here, just a hint of some trees, a little bit of context to show that this castle is fairly high up and there's just landscape in the far distance. And then I think it's done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting to watch, but I do hope you give it a go drawing because it is such a good subject for learning to draw the effect of detail, not the actual detail. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, Whether there are stones in it or not, make sure you have fun. Bye.